Hi, it's Eason, and welcome back to Metal Monday, where I talk about albums that I might recommend you listen to so you can start your week off right. This week, I will be talking about an album that was made in the wake of tumultuous changes that would probably have felled many other bands but did nothing to stop or even slow down this Chicago, Illinois Black and Sludge quintet. The album I am talking about, one of the best releases and or at the very least a definite contender for the best of lists of 2019 is Lord Mantis's Universal Death Church. Universal Death Church is the follow-up to the band's 2016 EP Nice Teeth Whore and the band's fourth full-length release overall, which also came with a whole slew of lineup changes, the most important of which probably is the addition of Dylan O'Toole from the sludge outfit Indian as the lead vocalist. Another change was the return of Charlie Fell, who had split from the band in 2014 under not-so-amicable circumstances as bassist and vocalist. However, the most important change made to the band's lineup was the addition of Bryce Butler, also of the band Contrarian, to the drums, who came to replace Bill Baumgartner, who has, unfortunately, passed away in 2014. Well, like I said, this many changes in the lineup and in this many key areas might have felled or at the very least completely derailed other bands, but Lord Mantis managed to persevere. Apart from a very brief split, or at least according to Encyclopedia Metallum, a very brief split, the band managed to stay together and they came up with Universal Death Church, which is kind of a prophetic album because it reflects the current times that we are living in almost perfectly. The title Universal Death Church is pretty much a reference to the world that we are living in, that we have been living in since 2019. The band took inspiration not only from their own troubles and or the state of the world, but they also took inspiration, interesting enough, from the 1992 neo-noir crime movie Bad Lieutenant, starring Harvey Keitel as an extremely corrupt, drug and gambling addicted police officer. According to the band, the way that New York City is depicted in the movie served as a perfect parallel to how the world is right now, and this was their jump-off point for the album. The sound of Lord Mantis has always been a rather wonderfully abominable love child born from an unholy marriage between the savage aggression of black metal and the groovy riffing and crushing atmospheres of sludge. The band's overall riffing style took elements of black doom and sludge metal and melded them together and laid them on top of more or less black metal style drums while preserving an oppressive, disgusting atmosphere within itself. All these things are alive and well within Universal Death Church, but the band saw fit to add yet another influence on top of this, which is industrial of all things. Now, if the first thought that comes to your head when I say industrial influences is an overabundance of 80s synths, you can just put that thought to bed right now. What I mean is more of an approach to song and riff writing than the addition of such an instrument. Although there is that one moment in the final track Whole, but we're gonna get to that. With one notable exception that I'm going to get to shortly, it is actually possible to divide the track list of Universal Death Church into two distinct sections. One section is the more classical-like black and sludge stylings of Lord Mantis, and the second one is the more industrial songs. The main difference between these two sections is spelled out in how the core sound is related. The black and sludge sections are a bit freer, whereas the industrial songs are a bit more restrained and quantified. What I mean by that is that the songs in Universal Death Church are more heavily influenced either by the black and sludge or the industrial, but never get taken over completely by either of these influences. So it's more like a sliding scale than anything else. On the black and sludge side, the opening track Santa Muerte Muerte does a wonderful job as a declaration of intentions. The song kicks off immediately without any time wasted with a full-on blast beat laid under a tremolo-picked and extremely savage churning riff, which then serves as the backdrop to Dylan O'Toole's impressive screams. The whole song is one savage, aggressive, and fast-paced beast that just barrels forward with all the subtlety of a runaway train intent on demolishing a hospital full of civilians. Too soon? However, as if wanting to introduce you to the second variation on the Lord Mantis sound that you will be finding on this album, the band immediately pulls out God's Animal, the first of the more industrial influenced tracks immediately after Santa Muerte. God's Animal, as the second track, shifts gears to a more, I guess you could say, Fear Factory-like songwriting, where the riff is mostly just chugging at a certain rhythm and the drums, especially the kicks for the most part, follow that riff. Of course, there are little changes within the track. It is not just the same thing start to finish, but it does present a far more easily quantified and far more restrained sound as opposed to the more seemingly boundless savagery of Santa Muerte. God's Animal, however, is also home to a very nice little lead section and a sludgy bridge that makes me say I can't hate on this track at all. The relation that Santa Muerte has with God's Animal is pretty much how the album unfolds from that point on. There's usually a more black and sludge track followed by a more industrial track. However, this does not mean that Lord Mantis made the mistake of sharply dividing their tracklist straight down the middle with very little intersection and or melding of the styles in between. Far from it. This is perhaps best exemplified with the two leading signals, Damocles Falls and Sulphotic Alpha, which I am desperately hoping not to have mispronounced. Sulphotic Alpha is perhaps the best example of this, mainly because for most of its running length, the song sounds like it harks straight from the Perverter era Lord Mantis. Where it blends the more industrial influences is first and foremost in a rather transitional section where Dylan O'Toole's vocals have been vocoded with a more mechanized sound, almost as if they were coming through a buzzer. And then the song comes to an abrupt and full stop before changing gears from the more black and sludge stylings to the more industrial style that the band sports. And the transition, while not seamless, is nice enough that you can see both styles melding together in a cohesive track. The break in the pattern, interesting enough, is the song Low Entropy Narcosis, which is basically an acoustic interlude track. Now, if you know me or if you have been watching this channel for some time, you will know that I actually despise ambient intros, but the second thing that I hate more is pointless acoustic and or noise interludes. This, however, is the exception. I don't know how the fuck they did it, but Lord Mantis managed to insert what is basically an acoustic riff playing under some atmospherics and eventually some spoken word passages seamlessly into the heart of this album. Whereas on any other album, this might have been a flow breaker or a very distracting moment that took away from the natural flow of the album, Low Entropy Narcosis somehow manages to be an integral part of Universal Death Church's flow, which is saying something, so kudos on that, guys. Until that track, the album, like I said, goes by the established pattern of more sludge-influenced song followed by more industrial-influenced song. So it goes Santa Muerte to God's Animal, and then the second pair is Sulphotic Alpha and Consciousness.exe, which is home to one of the jumpiest, most addictive and most memorable riffs on the album. Despite the constant switching between tracks that lean more heavily on one side or the other of our sliding scale, Universal Death Church is actually a very well and naturally flowing album. It keeps you engaged throughout its length, especially by switching things up after the halfway point, and manages to keep your interest until the very end. It also helps that after Low Entropy Narcosis, the album just starts throwing more and more disgusting, more black and sludge in your direction one after the other. Flesh World, the penultimate track of the album, is especially worth mentioning since sandwiched between the magnificent closer that is Hole and the more well-blended styles of Damocles Falls, it could have easily ended up a write-off at the end, especially since it's one of the longer tracks on the album. But leaning more towards the black metal side of things, it manages to be a rather aggressive and rather sinister presence heralding the arrival of the final track, Hole. Now, the closing track, Hole, is a rather interesting twist in the album because after a very brief intro, it busts out the saxophone. Now, I have inquired in the past about why metal bands, especially extreme metal bands, seem to be opening up to the idea of using specifically saxophone as a secondary instrument. And the best answer that I got in this regard is sax is sex. If it was good enough for George Michael and Wham, it's good enough for you. With its more doomy riffs, more chilled out, relaxed vibe, and filled to the brim with saxophone sections and drum attacks, Hole seems like the more zen finisher to a turbulent album. I mean, I normally prefer my albums to go out with a bang, but this whimper will do just as nicely in this case. On the production side of things, there is a little bit of a complaint to be made. On Universal Death Church, Lord Mantis has resorted to filing down the more sharper edges of their sound, resulting in a more well-rounded and therefore well-polished sound. But this also means that the sound is lacking in some of the bite that it used to have. Say what you will about having a well-balanced production, which, as you well know, I adore, but retaining some of the more intimate aspects of the sound, the feedback noise and the buzz of speakers, might have actually benefited this album some. As it stands, it makes a little bit more of a duller impact than it would have if it was produced to be a little bit more raw in terms of sound. Now, I'm not saying that feedback noise should have taken over everything or that this had to be produced like fucking Burzum, but I'm just saying it could have done with a little bit more bite. Don't get me wrong, the production is well-rounded enough, the mix is exceptionally well, and the mastering is quite good, so you can, for the most part, forego this. It's just a personal opinion. Now, with all that said, I have seen a lot of comparisons between Universal Death Church and what is arguably the band's best or best-known release, the 2012's Perverter, and I don't think that is a fair comparison, mainly because this isn't the same Lord Mantis as it existed in 2012. The changes that were made to the band's sound are not ill-advised or abrupt or done in a ham-fisted manner, just gluing things together that don't really belong and trying to fit square pegs into round holes. It is done very well. The band manages to meld their new influences into their core sound, which means they don't have to give up their whole identity in order to explore new pastures. This, by any measure, is a success, making Universal Death Church a triumph. So does that mean that I am recommending this album? What do you think? If you like black metal, if you like blackened hardcore, if you like sludge metal, if you like a mixture of these things, if you like death metal, if you like heavy, oppressive music with lots of tasteful touches, extremely competent playing, and unique riff stylings, Universal Death Church has a lot to offer to you. If you're a Lord Mantis fan, I imagine you have already listened to this album to death, and in that case, why not drop me a line and tell me how much you love it or hate it, not discriminating against opinions here. All in all, just check it out. I highly doubt you will be disappointed. However, I am going to say that if you are only now just dipping your toes into the genres that were spoken about in this review, I would say get a little bit better acclimated to the musical landscape before coming into Lord Mantis. Not that it's going to prevent you from enjoying it if you're not all that well-versed, I'm just saying that you might enjoy it a little bit more. Well, if you are looking for an album to start your week off right, I would say Universal Death Church is definitely a great one to go with, especially considering the fact that it is, like I said, an album for the times. So, until next time, hope you have a great week. It's Eason. Peace out.